A warm welcome to our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. You're watching The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here are the headlines. All is set as European leaders and the Ukrainian president head to Washington, D.C. for fresh talks with President Trump. Myanmar announces a date for general elections to hold the first as the coup in 2021. Plus, Togolese athlete prepares for most daring challenge yet, a triathlon a day for 100 consecutive days. You're watching The World Today. Preparations are in top gear in the U.S. capital, Washington, D.C., as European leaders as well as the Ukrainian president are expected for that all-important meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump. Now, outside the West Wing of the White House, photographers are jostling for space, setting up ladders and stools in hopes of getting and taking the right angles of the visitors. Early morning TV hits have taken place, all in anticipation of the meeting at the White House, a follow-up to the one that President Trump held with the Russian President Vladimir Putin in Anchorage in Alaska on Friday. And while the European leaders prepare for their meeting, the Russian president has been on the phone in calls with the Brazilian president, the president of South Africa, the Indian prime minister, and the president of Tajikistan. The U.S. president, on the other hand, has been posting on social media, hailing today as a big day at the White House. The main agenda, of course, is peace in Ukraine, but even the day started on a challenging note for Ukraine, as according to President Volodymyr Zelensky, at least 10 people have been killed in what is described as cynical Russian strikes across Ukraine. There have been reports of casualties in a strike on a fuel facility outside the city of Odessa. There have also been attacks on Kharkiv and Zaporizhia, as well as 3 people who were killed and 23 others injured. Let's talk more now about the meeting in Washington, D.C. and the preparations ahead of it. Our Washington correspondent Maria Bird joins us now. Maria, we know that preparations are ongoing. The UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is already on the ground. He's at the Ukrainian embassy as we speak. President Zelensky himself is also in Washington, D.C. What can we expect today?
What we can expect today is going to be a day that is going to really be filled with kind of a lot of not only ceremonial, but hopefully some movement forward. As you mentioned earlier, the president said this is an unprecedented day. When you think about the number of world leaders that will be at the White House, we have begun to see some of the motorcades enter into the White House grounds just a few moments ago. And so this is going to definitely be something that I think many Americans are surprised about, especially within the short order that it has occurred. But also, I think the world will definitely see how this will definitely play out. When we talk about, the president mentioned that he's not quite sure of a peace agreement, but he's looking for an agreement to move forward and to getting all these countries on the same page to identify how this agreement can move forward, especially being as though he just had the meeting in Alaska just the other day with President Putin and noting that he was not quite clear on relinquishing the area that obviously Ukraine has said is still their land, but being able to potentially look at other ways to move it forward. And so the question is, what is President Zelensky going to be willing to come to the table with once he hears from all the world leaders, and especially with the president's recent meeting?
Yes, and speaking of that recent meeting, the one he held with the Russian President Vladimir Putin at Alaska on Friday, it was supposed to be a meeting where President Trump was supposed to listen, I think, was what the White House said he was supposed to do with that meeting. But then he went on siding with the Russian president, seeking an end to the war instead of a temporary ceasefire. But the coalition of the willing, that's the French president, the Ukrainian president Volodymyr Zelensky, the Finnish president, the European Commission president, as well as a NATO Secretary General, will all be in Washington today. They're hoping, as the French president said yesterday, to provide a united front to President Trump. What would that mean, for the president as he prepares to host them?
As you mentioned, it's very interesting that the president was very clear that he was expecting, as you said, to listen when they met in Russia. And the meeting went much longer than expected. We know that President Trump had mentioned very early on that he would know in the first couple of minutes the tone of the meeting. But it appears as if through that meeting there in Alaska, that it went far beyond what were the initial indications, the initial intentions. And it's expected that potentially there was more discussions beyond just peace agreements, and as you said, not just a ceasefire, but an end to the war. And as you've stated further, is that the French president, other members of the European Union and NATO are coming to the White House, I think, as a way, as you mentioned, the United Front, and to kind of come to the table at the White House, not having this meeting somewhere else, but having it in Washington, I think is a momentous occasion. And I think that is a real sign that they are coming united, but also that they are willing to come to the table for an agreement and to work collectively with President Trump. As we know, the U.S. has been in the forefront of the call to end the war and in support of Ukraine even prior to this administration. So it'll be very interesting to see how this continues to play out. And obviously, President Zelensky will be there, hoping that obviously there can be some sort of agreement and that the countries can find a way to have an end to this war.
Now, I know you have to quickly go and continue monitoring this meeting at the White House. But Maria, there were attacks across Ukraine today: Zaporizhia, Odessa, Kharkiv, the main targets of these attacks. Would that have an impact on the meetings, knowing that this is happening just days after President Putin did say to the U.S. president that, they can end the war in Ukraine?
It will definitely have an impact. I think it'll be an initial impact. I think it'll focus in for the president will obviously spend some time discussing that piece, but I think the focal point will really be about how do we move to an end to the war. So I think the president was very clear in his conversation, his discussion, his meeting with President Putin. And so now it's going to be about what he brings back from that. And I don't think that there's any surprise to anyone that there were additional attacks, even despite the fact that this meeting just occurred a few days ago.
Thanks again, Maria, and thank you for keeping an eye on this story as we continue to monitor progress towards that all-important meeting at the White House. Now, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will be at the White House today. We've already established that. But ahead of the talks, President Zelensky and U.S. envoy Keith Kellogg held talks near the White House. Neither of them was at the summit in Alaska on Friday, as they were not invited, but expected today at the White House. Apart from President Zelensky are the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, French President Emmanuel Macron, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, Finland President Alexander Stubb, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, and the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. It follows a meeting between the US and the Russian presidents on Friday, where President Trump said they agreed on many points, and the Russian president said the talks could pave the path for peace. Now, on Sunday, Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, said that President Putin had agreed some security guarantees for Ukraine and that the US could offer Article 5-like protection.
I want to get the thing set.
Envoy Steve Witkoff was speaking to American media about the outcome of the Trump-Putin meeting on Friday. He said the Russian president had made some concessions around 5 key territory regions that had been heavily contested by Moscow, adding that Vladimir Putin had agreed to what he called robust security guarantees, calling these game-changing, without confirming whether they will involve U.S. boots on the ground. Back in Moscow, the Russian president addressed a press briefing where he summarized results of the meeting in Alaska. According to him, it was both timely and very useful. All areas of cooperation was discussed, and the Ukraine crisis was discussed fairly. He says they took the opportunity to discuss the genesis, the origins of the crisis, and that the elimination of these root causes that should form the basis of a settlement. He said the dialogue with Trump was frank and informative. The high-profile talks on Friday between President Trump and President Putin lasted more than 2.5 hours.
I'm very pleased to be here with you today.
In the meantime, European leaders and the Ukrainian president are preparing to meet with Trump at the White House on Monday. During a press conference on Sunday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he remains in the dark about what was discussed between Trump and Putin in their high-profile meeting in Alaska. He said he wanted the U.S. president to share details with him and the European leaders. He doubted the Russian president will provide any security guarantees, but welcomed the U.S. decision to offer Ukraine security guarantees in the event of a peace deal with Russia. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who was also at the press briefing, addressed the issue of peace negotiations and ceasefire.
I think not the term is so important. Important is, and it matters, what's the effect. And the effect must be stop the killing. That's the most important part. Whether we call it a ceasefire or it's a peace deal, stop the killing. Point number one.
In another development, French President Emmanuel Macron told reporters on Sunday afternoon leaders headed to the White House on Monday must remind the U.S. president what unites the U.S., Ukraine, and the EU, citing their shared desire for peace and for Russia to respect international law and territorial sovereignty. Attending Monday's meeting are leaders from the UK, Italy, Germany, Finland, France, NATO, and the European Commission. Still expecting those guests at the White House this morning in U.S. So that's at U.S. time this morning. The UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer was aboard his plane earlier today, speaking to reporters about the importance of the meeting this afternoon. He says we've got to get this right. Mr. Starmer arrived at the Ukrainian embassy in Washington this afternoon. He's been discussing with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. In the meantime, geopolitical analyst and risk and security management specialist Onyekachi Adekoya shared his thoughts on what the meeting today could look like. He also had some advice for all the parties involved. He was chatting to me on our international relations program, Diplomatic Channel.
Meeting on Monday will just be clear. President Trump has the opportunity to extricate the Americans from any future obligation. To say, Zelensky, here's the plan, here's the agreements. Again, when you talk about negotiation, you have to ask if Zelensky refuses the deal, what is the likely alternative for Ukraine and for President Zelensky? The odds are not good. So there is no way Ukraine, having been led to this mad path, will get anything better than what Donald Trump will be offering at this time, which is to freeze the conflict along the current line of contact, cede territory, and be given some security guarantees. What is the best guarantee? The Americans have said, they would not get into a war with Russia over Ukraine, clearly. The UK will be spent in a 2 weeks war with Russia. In 2 weeks, the UK has 66,000 fighting men, not even up to 66,000. What the Arsenal has will not last them 2 weeks of war. Germany doesn't have nuclear weapons of itself. France is a shadow of itself. The Poles may have an appetite to go to war with Russia, but they have no nuclear weapons of themselves. So when Europe says that they will continue to support Ukraine, with what? The Patriot system is dangerously low on stock. Raytheon doesn't have even the jet motors for the Patriot missiles. China controls the rare earths and magnetic market. Some of these components are important to produce some of these missile systems. I don't see where the help will come from. So Russia has never been opposed to Ukraine joining Europe. You do some research, you find that that's part of the previous agreement reached. You can join the EU, no problem, get the economic advantage, but NATO is a no-no. And if Russia is insisting on the promise that NATO and the US made, that not one each to the east, will it move? After Russia ceded and allowed the unification of Germany, and made certain concessions and did some reforms, so Russia is within its own right to say, okay, you can give any guarantees, we can sign to it, can be part of the comprehensive agreements. a framework of which was agreed in Turkey at 2022 before the Europeans, according to reports, scuttled the whole agreement. So what will a security guarantee look like? You denazify, according to the Russians, demilitarize to a point where you do not pose a threat to Russia. You join the EU, but any military alliance is a no-no. So what better deal can, under the circumstance, can President Zelensky get? I wouldn't know, and I don't know where the help is coming from. So I think the conversation on Monday will be frank. He'll be read the Riot Act, and he has the options. And Trump can very well walk away and leave Europe with his problems. And remembering that it has a bigger fish to fry, and that fish is in the Far East.
And now, as we close this interview, perhaps you have I don't know, if you were, in the room with President Trump, you're in the room with the European leaders, and perhaps with Putin sometime in the near future, what would you say to either of them?
Amarchi, you've sent me on a very difficult assignment. I don't know how to answer that question because for the Europeans, my God, I would ask what has bewitched them really. They've cut their nose to spite their face. Every nation, I think, must pursue what is in its own informed national interest. The euro was a major rival to the dollar, and today the European economy is in tatters. They've, on the altar of politics and ideology, sacrificed what I consider national energy independence, strategic energy independence. And, today the German economy is struggling. Most European economies are struggling. The citizens are disillusioned. So my advice to Europeans would be to focus more on what is in Europe's informed interest. And I would say that Russia is the link between Asia and Europe. Russia would always be on that continent. So best they find a way to make peace amongst themselves. To the Russians, well, peace is, at the end of the day, every war will end up in a negotiating table. Peace is always better. So Russia must find a way to live as much as it can, despite its own troubles, peaceably with the European continent. For America, clearly, America has a president that is focused on the real issues. And the real issue is that the US dollar is under significant threat. If the US loses its reserve currency status, then I'm sorry to say, when the US president called Africa, some countries, Africa a shithole, it runs the same risk. If today the US dollar is, for some reason, no longer a global reserve currency, there would be a problem. And I worry because in that state, we may have to see a major war, a war for survival, because again, what would the US do with all its military might if its own existence is threatened? So I think America must find a way to walk back the weaponization of the dollar, the weaponization of the global switching platform, SWIFT, and walk back the weaponization of trade, and, let's go back to that place where, we all were working for a bigger pie for the sake of humanity. I hope this advice is found useful and it reaches the people that should listen. It's just my sincere hope, Raj.
You can watch the full interview with Onyekachi Adekoya and his other thoughts on the war in Ukraine and efforts by the US and Europe tonight at 8:30 p.m. on Sky 515 if you're in the UK. And for our viewers in Africa and the rest of the world, you can watch on DSTV 420 and on Channels TV's YouTube page at 11:30 p.m. We're in Myanmar now, where general elections have not taken place since the military took over power in 2021 and imprisoned democratically elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi. The junta has announced the country's first general elections will now take place on December 28th. Previous plans to hold an election were repeatedly delayed as the military has struggled to contain an opposition insurgency which has gained control over much of the country. At least 55 political parties have registered to participate in the polls. A statement from the junta says the first phase of the multi-party democratic general election for each parliament will begin on Sunday, December 28, 2025, while dates for the subsequent phases will be announced later. The National League for Democracy, led by Aung San Suu Kyi, which won landslides in the two elections prior to the coup, will not be allowed to contest this one. A Togolese immigrant who once worked as security guard in Nigeria is making an impact as an endurance athlete in the United Arab Emirates. Here's 42-year-old Ghani Suleiman, who has lived in the UAE for 8 years, taking on his most daring challenge yet, a triathlon a day for 100 consecutive days. Well, he hopes to motivate other immigrants to become positive contributors. Our correspondent Mayowa Adigoke has his story.
And going to the water now.
4:30 a.m. local time in Dubai, and Togo-born endurance athlete Ghani Suleiman is ready to start his 100-day triathlon challenge for the Guinness Book of World Records.
I feel a little bit nervous, but it's just the excitement.
Cheered on by a few friends and supporters, he wades into the beach for a 2-kilometer swim, which he completes in under an hour. Up next, cycling for 80 kilometers, followed by an 18-kilometer run, all as the desert temperatures pick up with the sunrise.
I do them for a good reason. So I said to myself, when I go to sleep, I ask always myself, what do I do today to help someone? What did I do to put a smile in someone's face? What did I do today to change someone's life or to contribute on someone's getting a better life? That's why I always do those challenges to raise funds for charity.
Repeating this challenge for 100 days is no easy task. And same can be said about his journey as an immigrant who once lived in Nigeria working as a security guard and driver.
Still, where I was working as a security guard, they love what I do, and they put their trust in me, and they put their properties in my hand, so I take care of all their properties and everything. And from there, I started working as a driver in ExxonMobil, and from there, I switched to a boss, and I finally work with the daughter of former President Obasanjo. Her name is Damilola, and she was the last person I worked with before moving back to Dubai.
In the UAE, where he has lived since 2017, life has not come without certain challenges, including discrimination.
I don't do what I do for fame or to be known or for money. In fact, what I do, I don't get paid for it. Yeah, I don't get paid for it. I do what I do to help, to give back to the community. So as we in African, wherever we are, we need to know where we are coming from and where we are going. And if in any way we get misunderstood or mistreated, we need to stand our ground.
Ghani continues to advocate for mental resilience, and with the support of the Professional Triathletes Organization and the Al Jalila Children's Foundation, he continues this challenge until November the 16th. From Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, Maya Wadigoke for Channels Television News.
And that's the program today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.